And to discuss this, I'm now joined via Skype from LA, Peter Mathews, Professor of Political Science at Cypress College. Peter, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Danica.
Firstly, the President has expressed his intention to keep the Saudis as a key US ally. It does appear that he is not trying to upset Saudi Arabia.
He's trying not to, but he might be upsetting a lot of the rest of the world, including the Middle East. You know, the United States has a reputation, originally at least for a long time, of being a nation that supported freedom and democracy and self-determination. And also, don't forget, rule of law. So those ideals, which are so important in winning some what's called soft power for America around the world, are being challenged now, especially when Mr. Trump says initially that, you know, the sale of $100 billion worth of armaments is more important than a single journalist's life. So this is very precarious right now. He should have come clean and said, look, this evidence is overwhelming. We got the CIA actually coming out with a report. The CIA already has said that the Crown Prince was involved with this, maybe even directed it. There's circumstantial evidence. There's a phone call, for example, that was intercepted between the Crown Prince's brother and Khashoggi himself, where the Crown Prince's brother Khalid told Khashoggi to go on in the consulate, the Saudi consulate, and after that, he'll be safe. And yet he wasn't safe. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence here that indicates that the Crown Prince was involved, and the U.S. should definitely take some kind of action, regardless of what the consequences in terms of what feeling that, well, that was going to upset the relationship. Well, if you don't do something, it'll upset the relationship of a lot of other people in that area, and Saudi Arabia has to be more treated as properly the way it should be if this was the case was true.
Well, that's the thing now. I mean, how is he going to be able to keep this middle ground of sorts? He's facing mounting pressure to punish Saudi Arabia, but also, Peter, he wants to clearly push on with his agenda in the Middle East.
Well, he has to let them know that it's unacceptable if this actually happened and that there should be penalties. So, for example, the Saudi government can decide whether to decide who should be the one in terms of power, because don't forget the Crown Prince was a person who went ahead and got the crown, so to speak, from the king to rule the country, especially the portfolios of defense and security and economics, very powerful government portfolios, and intelligence as well. Now, look, there are other people that he pushed aside. Don't forget when he put under house arrest all those Saudi leaders and princes for a while and then said they were involved with corruption. That was a big power struggle. There are many other people who are capable of running the country from there, and President Trump should let him know right now that the United States there are consequences for certain actions, especially when you talk about journalists. Danica, journalists are so important as the fourth estate, the most important pillar of democracy in a democracy, the pillar of being able to put out information that's accurate, that's informative. And if you go ahead and intimidate journalists by allowing this government ostensibly to, brutally assassinate, at least one of the members of the government, to assassinate a journalist who was critical of it, this is unacceptable for democracy and for the United States' position around the world. So that's what has to be done.
Absolutely. Peter, let's look at other news as well. US-China divisions have taken centre stage at the APEC summit over the weekend. Regional leaders failed to agree on a final communique for the first time in the summit's history. But there's no doubt there's been a huge escalation of tensions between the world's top two powers. What has been the reaction over this in Washington? Has it registered yet?
It certainly will be if it hasn't already, and that is it's a very major trading bloc. It's, an economic bloc. It's the 21 countries, and for 25 years, the first time it could not issue a communique, an agreement, and it had to do with the United States and China's major disputes on world trade and how it should work. And China is calling for free trade, but also a trade that would be more fair. And the Chinese economic model is different than the United States, and that's what really bothers Trump and other right-wing Republicans. China wants to have some government involvement through industrial policy, and they have the state help to support private business and to help support exports of Chinese goods. And China's had a foreign policy where it actually helps with loans to countries like, in the Central Asia, and even Turkey, I believe, received a loan to help build a railroad or start building some high-speed rail. Other countries have. Now, the accusation of the United States is that China puts those countries into debt, and then China just seizes their various assets. I didn't see any evidence of that yet. That has to be provided. It was just all words from Michael Pence, vice president. And when he makes his accusation, there has to be evidence of that. And what the U.S. is accusing, the Trump administration is accusing China of, is basically becoming an imperial power in the world and taking over the world. You have to have evidence when you make those kinds of accusations. And Australia and other countries are really worried But this terrible trade war between the two countries that was started by Trump, I would argue, this trade war is self-defeating. I warned against it when I talked about what happened in the Depression when you had the Smoot-Hawley tariffs brought in, and that made the Great Depression back in the 30s, much worse, and that this could escalate into a total global recession, again, Great Recession, if this trade war was launched and continues. And yet Trump has escalated it, and China has retaliated to some extent. And this is very unfortunate. They need to get cool heads need to prevail here so that everyone in the world could benefit economically, and military tensions also could be reduced. That's what should be done.
Yeah, even the PNG PM said that the world is worried. Peter, just finally, I mean, what happens here now? We are heading towards the G20. That's coming up, and Xi Jinping and Donald Trump were due to meet. I mean, could there potentially be a backlash from China?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump needs to start attending these meetings. He did not attend the APEC meeting. That's an insult to begin with, or a degradation of some kind of duty, which is so important that heads of state should be there who are involved with these very important negotiations. So with the G20, that's also imperative that Donald Trump actually attends it and takes a much more diplomatic approach and works with China. It's the world's second largest economy. It has huge influence, even in the United States. And don't forget, Trump's tariffs actually have raised the cost of living by 3%. He says that we have 3% extra, or 3.5% growth increase, which is true. The economy in the United States grew quite a bit. But what's that growth good for if the middle class doesn't get more income? And if they get a little bit more income, they have to fight off inflation, because now we have inflation because of these tariffs that Trump put on China and the trade war that ensued. So there's a double talk here. It needs to get straightened out with President Trump attending the summits and start to be more measured and more accommodating of other countries' needs too. Not just America first. America first implies other countries last or secondary, and that's not right. That attitude has to change so the United States can become a world partner once again with other countries and benefit humankind all over the world, not just American people.
Peter Mathews, Professor of Political Science at Cyprus College, thank you so much for your time as always.
My pleasure. Thank you, Danica.